Well, hello and welcome to Journals for Breakfast. My name is Andrea and I'm so happy you're here with me. Today we're going to be talking about burnout, as we talk about on this channel a lot, but specific to crafters burnout. I am a lifelong crafter and maker of various things. Obviously, knitting is in the story. But I've played with sewing and I do a lot of collage work, and I've always enjoyed various levels of crafts and have run through the trends through the years. I did a lot of cross stitching in the 80s and 90s. I did a lot of scrapbooking in the early 2000s. I've just always been engaged in it and loved it. But, and so many of my friends are too. And this is where this conversation comes up. I hear from a lot of my crafting friends that I am not alone when I hit a slump in crafting. Something that was once very important to me starts to fade away in some way. Now, for a lot of us, we hear language like I've kind of lost my mojo, or, just feeling sort of uninspired. But it can balloon, I believe, into full-on burnout sometimes too. And so that's what we're going to talk about today, is curing crafters burnout. But what I'll say about this is that the tips I'm going to share on how I kind of break through and break down what's happening in my crafting life when the burnout seems to hit, these are really the same 5 or 6 steps that I take to identifying, breaking down, and fixing burnout anywhere that it hits. So if you're interested in this topic at all, if you are a journaler at all and you want to get out a notebook and start taking some notes, I feel like what we're going to cover today will serve you well in other areas when you find yourself in a slump on housekeeping or in a slump on work or whatever it may be. These same tips I think will be very useful. I tell you in the description of this channel that journaling is my therapy to some degree. Journaling is what pulled me out of one of the worst phases of burnout I've ever gone through that was work related. And it was so bad that I thought for a time that actually my business may not survive it. It has, and I have, but journaling was a big part of that story. I've used a lot of other tools as well too, but just to sort of get to the heart of it and figure out what was really going on with me, journaling is where it started. So let's talk about a couple things in getting to the heart of burnout in our crafting life, in something that we love. And so first of all, burnout across the board, no matter where it's landing, if it is in burning out on being a parent, burning out on being a spouse, burning out on housekeeping, burning out on running a business. I believe that step one to burnout every time is simply admitting it. We just have to say to ourselves, this is happening. I think that in my case, and I'm sure that others can relate to this in some way, often what's happening when I find myself resistant to admitting out loud or on the page, writing it in a journal, that I've burnt out on something, is that there's some level of guilt associated with it. When it comes to our crafts and our hobbies, I think that's really pervasive because we're not being forced to do this. It, for most of us, isn't about making a living. This is something that we voluntarily brought into our lives. And there's a little guilt in there about saying that maybe this thing that we were super gung-ho about has kind of faded to us for some reason. So let's talk for a minute about identifying the guilt factor, and let's figure out where that's coming from. So one of the things I'll say for myself about the guilt factor when a hobby starts to fade out on me is the expense. I've probably put a lot of money into the products that go along with this hobby, whether it's sports equipment or painting equipment or easels. Maybe you've even devoted an entire room to your crafting at your home. There's expense involved. And so to not use those things can feel it can feel really wasteful, can't it? And so there's that extra pressure of, oh my gosh, am I burning out on this thing? And I better not burn out on this thing. I have $400 worth of yarn sitting behind me. I better be interested in knitting. So the guilt factor. Here's what I'll say. Step one, get out a journal, something that might be even your crafting journal from this point forward. This is going to be your book on knitting or painting or whatever it is. Start first and foremost by writing yourself a note that says, I've burned out on this and I feel guilty about it, and here's why. And start to break down for yourself, if you can, what is creating that sensation of guilt. It could be that you fought for a whole room in your house to be devoted to this. And you know that that's a little, other people in the house could use that space too, and they've given it to you. It could be just the investment in the products themselves and that they're just sitting. Write it out, get it out in front of you, face it, and then take a deep breath and let's consider some realities here about how we let that part of the guilt go, the expense, the investment in these items. One thing is that I have to remind myself on occasion that most of the things that we purchase for our crafting does not have an expiration date. I'll show you an example. This is a paint palette that I bought in 1989. Yep, I guess it's vintage. 1989, I wondered if it had a date on it. It's still perfectly good. Do you know what's really crazy? The paint on this is still perfectly good. I could absolutely knock out a small painting with what's remnant paint from 1989. Our craft items rarely have an expiration date on them. So the expense, let's let that go a little bit. Remember that a lot of these things are going to hang on for a long time. I'm looking at some notes here too. Yarn, generally speaking, does not expire. If you've bought a machine, so you bought a circuit cutting machine for all of those gift cards that you were sure you were going to make, and it's just sitting, or a color printer that you haven't turned on in 6 months. I'm looking at my color printer. They're not going to expire. Technology might move past it at some point, but how many of us have a sewing machine from the 70s or the 80s that's still an electric sewing machine? Does it have all the new gadgets on it? No. Does it sew a hem? Yeah. So honestly, the equipment doesn't expire. The yarn isn't going to go bad. The paint is probably not going to go bad. A plastic palette, whatever it is. So just let that go. The expense, one, you've already spent it, so it's there. You're not getting that back. Let's just drop that. And then the other thing about guilt, and this is one that's a little bit more personal, so you'll have to sort of reevaluate this for yourself. But the question I would ask myself about the guilt factor, is it in any way coming from an outside source? Oh, this is a little personal, isn't it? What I mean by that is, do we have someone in our life that we feel like has kind of given us the one eye about why we're not doing this thing that we really push to have space and time and spend money on buying? They might have even gone to a watercolor convention with us, or invested time at a knit show with us, and here this yarn sits. And do you feel like you're kind of getting that hairy eyeball that this stuff has come in and you're not using it? If you have a spouse or a partner or kids who are kind of giving you the one eye on it, that's something to consider. But get this, I've talked to a lot of crafters about crafting burnout and the pressure. I have heard back from many, and I can absolutely relate to this too, that even those who live alone, so their money is theirs to spend. There's no shared chit chat about the budget or how things go. They don't have kids, so they're not taking college money out and spending it on yarn, that they still can get this sensation of like outward pressure that's completely internally created, but it is coming from memories of a parent maybe who gave them a lot of grief about diving into projects and not completing them, or an ex, or just their own voice of self-doubt that, why do I jump in with 2 feet and spend $400 and then I don't even love it? I've had that history before. Look, these are all valid, but they also often are all sort of self-created into this big monster. Write them out. Are they really that big of a deal? We'll talk about some resources for that in another step, but step 1 is just let go of the guilt, let go of the shame. Try to pinpoint where it's coming from. Is it an internal thing that you're doing? Is it coming from an external? Is it a little bit of both? And can you address it? And then I will also share this. If you are in a position where someone in the house really is giving you a lot of grief about the products you've purchased and you're not seeming to be able to use them in a time frame that is satisfying their ideas about how this craft goes, talk to somebody. I mean this sincerely. Speak to a counselor, speak to a therapist. This is about relationship communication, and the way that we spend our money and our time has a big impact in our relationship, and it is okay to face that and address that. And when resentments start to build, that's usually a sign to me that it's time to start communicating again. Resentments in my world come from lack of communication. And so frustrations just start to build, and assumptions are being made, but nobody's really talking it out. Talk it out. And if you need a counselor to help you with that, do so. So step one, let's face the guilt, and then let's let go of the guilt. And step two is kind of identify where it's coming from, and then see if you can resolve that, okay? By the way, these are the same steps I use when I'm identifying burnout in so many areas. So take some notes, because I think these are helpful in a lot of ways. When I was burning out about my business, number one, the thing that was holding me back was how guilty I felt about that. So, okay, number three is also going to address the stash, the stuff we've bought. And that is simply choose a week, 2 weeks, a month, where you make a deal with yourself that you're putting it all down. You're not going to create anything. You're just going to clean. You're just going to tidy up. You can set a timer, 10 minutes a day, for 4 days a week, whatever you want to do. Pick a little time frame, something that's manageable, and do some rearranging. It doesn't have to be massive. You don't need to spend 18 hours one day ripping it all apart and putting it all back together, unless you do. If that's how you attack, go for it. But little small bites and just a little tidy. Pick one area, tidy it up. Pick a desk, tidy it up. I like to go through this pegboard and just sort of pull a few yarns, touch them again, and see, are they in the right place? Do I have mixed weights and materials over here? Would it be better to get all the mohair on this board and the rest of the stuff someplace else? Little tidies, little tidies. What happens when we start cleaning up our crafting space, to me, is kind of a miracle, because what always happens to me is, one, I dread it because there's guilt involved, and I feel like I have to go in there and face these products I'm not using. 2, I start powering through it. And 3, I start to fall back in love with all of those things. Just putting my hands back on that 30-year-old palette, seeing those paints, grabbing a scrap of paper and putting a little water on and going, look at that. That red is still red. It just reinvigorates me to why I was ever attracted to this stuff to begin with. And if it doesn't, that's really relieving too, because all of a sudden it can become crystal clear that this thing that once had you just doesn't right now. And that is okay. Rather than it being there looming in your face, staring you down from the corner, can we just say goodbye to it? Just pack it up for a bit. So clean up the crafting space. And now what it might be worth doing is taking a few of those things that, boy, when you put your hands back on them, what you felt was kind of a pit in your stomach, not a bloom of inspiration. Put them into a bin. Write a note that says, thank you for your service. I'll be with you again. Label it clearly and tuck it someplace out of the way, okay? Just out of your mind for now. You don't have to make any solid decisions about anything today. 30-year-old paint palette. I'm really glad I never threw it away. It's super handy. So yeah, just kind of move it out of your way so it's not right in your face saying, you're still not painting. You're still not painting. You know, I just tucked it away and it just didn't matter. So clean up the craft space. As I go through the cleanup process, I also realize often that there are some things I might be able to sell. A lot of knitters will destash, go to Ravelry, list it, and see if they can get a few bucks for it. Again, something like equipment, an old sewing machine, or a paper cutter, or something that you just feel like is really not going to serve you anymore. Try to get a few bucks for it. Great. Another thing you can do is donate it to a really good cause. Do some hunting in your area. A lot of groups like Rotary work with hospitals and do crafting sessions. So getting in with, you know, like a St. Jude's Hospital children's section to donate some of your crafting items. Maybe it will even have you volunteering to teach some people how to use this equipment. right? I mean, it could really spawn a whole nother thing. This comes simply from step 3 in the burnout process, which is just start tidying up the crafting space and the crafting supplies. I don't have room to move anything anywhere in here, so nothing actually ever goes away. I just rearrange it. I just find a different placement for it, and just changing out the color scheme, it can really inspire me. Just moving things into different storage bins, shifting them slightly. Oh, it feels so good. And when it's tidied up, the inspiration does often come back. So there's step number 3 in this. And number 4, now this is a big part of the work burnout, generally speaking, and it's not always a big part of crafting burnout, but hear me out on this one. Have you set any deadlines or rules about your craft? Okay. So what would be some examples of some deadlines or some rules? In the world of knitting, have you agreed to a test knit and the deadline is approaching? Have you agreed to knit something for a birth or a graduation, some sort of gift that has a deadline attached to it? Is it super arbitrary? Have you decided that you are going to knit along with your knitting group? You are all going to do this one big project and it's just not happening for you. But that deadline's kind of arbitrary, isn't it? I mean, you've just sort of set it with this knitting group. Does it even really matter? Will they forgive you if you step out of this knit along? And have you agreed to any commissions, right? Knitters do that, agree to sample knits. Painters do that. They agree to do wedding invitations for a friend or something like that. It can seem like an okay idea at the time, but then the pressure builds. I know we all know the standard cliches of being careful about turning what you love into work, because then it just becomes work. But honestly, even these little simple deadlines that we put on ourselves in the world of our own crafting, that can really shut us down. So what I'll ask is, for myself, when I am looking at deadlines, what I ask myself is, does the deadline actually matter? Have I already guaranteed this product, or was this just my own idea and nobody even knows about it, so I can just let it go? You know, do you do that? Because I do that. I get in my head that I have to have this blanket done for this person for Christmas, and this person has no idea that this blanket might even be a thing. So what am I doing? It would make a lovely Easter gift. It would make a never mind, tear it apart gift. Forget it. Just let it go. So are there arbitrary deadlines? I think that in the world of journaling about this and sorting through this, one of the questions that we can ask ourselves is, am I deadline oriented? And so it's something that you may have thought a lot about. It may be something you haven't put a lot of thought into. But if you've ever been in a book club, for example, that usually is a really great place to discover if you are deadline motivated or not. There is no right or wrong on this, by the way. This is gummy bears and milk chocolate. They're both phenomenal. You have to sort of decide if you're going to have to be stuck with one forever, which will it be? And what I'll say is that some of us are deadline motivated and some of us are not. A deadline just puts pressure on that starts to shut us down. Book clubbers often figure that out pretty quickly. They cannot get that book read. Book clubbers often figure that out pretty quickly. The only reason they've even read 8 books this year is because that book club had those deadlines out there for them. So you'll feel it for yourself. If you are shut down by deadlines, that is totally cool. You're milk chocolate, somebody is gummy bears. There is no wrong answer. Just know it and be honest with yourself about that, so you're careful about the things that you say yes to when it comes to setting up deadlines. Even things that feel fun, like a test knit. It can be a lot of fun, but if that deadline looming out there is going to shut you down, it can shut down a lot of your knitting joy or whatever it is that you're working on. The pressure to create for someone else, like an invitation or a set of cards or something, that's really intense, you guys. That's not minor stuff. Maybe complete the one that you've said that you would and make a real clear promise to yourself that you're not going to step into that again without really thinking it through. So another good question to ask yourself, are there any deadlines or rules that you're focusing on that could be removed? They're arbitrary. And let's see, another one that I like to do is kind of consider servicing some of my equipment. Is it time to get that sewing machine out and just take it down to a service center and get it really cleaned and functioning well. Maybe one of the reasons that the sewing machine got tucked away is because the bobbin kept skipping, right? And ultimately it was frustrating. You weren't getting much done. And now it turns out what really needs to happen is just a good service on the thing. And that can feel progressive. You know, it feels like we're doing something towards our craft, but it's out of our hands. We've handed it to a professional to repair this tool for us or clean it up or refurb it in some way, which leads me to the next one, which is buy a little something to refresh the craft. So step one was, do we feel guilty that we're spending money on this thing and then not using it? And step 6 is buy more stuff. That sounds about like me. Hey, listen, I'm talking about a little investment that can just kickstart the joy again. In the world of painting, it could be 3 new colors. That's it, just 3. 1 new brush, a single pad of good quality paper that you've been wanting to try. In the world of knitting, it doesn't have to be a sweater's quantity of designer yarn. It can be, do a hat project out of a yarn that's just a color that brings you a lot of joy. 1 skein. Go someplace inexpensive and just see what's available. It might surprise you what's at the big box store that can just recharge it a little bit. Maybe what you really need are just a couple new needles, right? Or a beautiful new project bag. Add a little something to sort of resurge the joy a little bit. You know, that circuit cutter. Is it possible that you're just burned out on the papers? Are you still working with stacks of paper that you bought at Hobby Lobby in 2000? And really, they're beautiful, but your eyes are tired of them. And it's just time to refresh. You know, you could refresh that for $5 and have 5 brand new sheets of beautiful paper, 2-sided, technically 10 patterns. You get where I'm going? Okay. Is that hobbyist math a little bit? Maybe. But in the end, what I'll say is a little purchase to refresh, I think, is a great way to go, and can make a big difference. You know, when I was burning out at work, one of the things that we addressed was some equipment that was just failing me. No kidding. And just getting some of that equipment either out of there or replaced or refurbed made a big difference. It changed the lighting a little bit. It changed the background noise. So buy a little something to refresh. I'm giving you permission right here from me. And then the next thing is to start back with really tiny projects. When I'm in a slump in something that I love, I'm not going to try to bring out my sewing machine and sew curtains for the entire living room, right? How about just a zip top project bag to put all my lipsticks in my purse? Like, let's keep it super simple. Let me show you something I do in the world of painting. This is a notebook that I found at Five Below, which means it was $5. And it's sketch pad paper. I don't know that it's watercolor quality necessarily. This little booklet, here's what I paint in here. A feather. 1 feather. This feather, the background of it, I don't know if it took an entire second of my time. 1 second. And so on days that I'm not motivated, that I don't want to get out the easel, that I can't find to get kind of going, I just move the brush across the paper. Just move the brush across the paper and create a feather. That's it. It may be the only painting that I do. If you follow me at all on Instagram, where I'm also Journals for Breakfast, and I hope you'll join me there, I show everybody my my daily tracker for positivity. And in that tracker is 1 word, which is art. And if I do a 1-second feather in this little book, I get to check art off. I've created something. Look at this one, just this big watery. I actually really like that one for some reason. A feather. This whole book is just full of these little feathers. I'm going to go pretty soon and replace this little booklet. This is a little scrap of paper. I actually did a little collage on my feather, which then kicked me into collaging my feathers. So it's sort of morphed into another little hobby that I love, which is collage. Look, I love this one. This is Army Greens. And then that notebook washi. That could not have taken me 3 minutes of my time. Sometimes I'm just trying to get ink off the brush, you know, or paint, excuse me, off the brush. So just fill in. These take seconds. Tiny. How do I do that in other crafts? Like I said, with sewing machine, get it out, and a headband. I mean, really, just keep it so super simple. In the world of knitting, I do swatches. What did she say? If you're a knitter, that might just have made your palms sweat. I will just get out yarn that I bought because I loved it, and it is sitting there staring back at me, and just start swatching. Just knit up a little 4x4 square. It feels good to put my fingers on it, and I can learn so much from that little piece of material. If I'm inspired, or if there's a really good reason why, now I see why this is just sitting here. Okay, I'm gonna think about that. So start back with tiny little projects. By the way, when I do these tiny knit projects, knit swatches, without any purpose, I don't get out a pattern book, I don't do anything like that. I just swatch. The other thing that I'll mention is find a good book about your craft. Again, this goes to kind of refreshing the stash a little bit, or refreshing your collection. But when it's time for me to stop attempting to be the motivator of creativity, for me to stop being the avenue of action, I'll just read what someone else is doing. And that often sparks something really great within me. I've showed you guys this one before, Painting Calm, that a friend of mine on Instagram showed me. And she's just got these beautiful drills in here. And if all you did was just peruse this book, look at the colors, right? Immediately inspiring. Just feels good to look at it all. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to paint a dragonfly or a cactus. Just looking at what another artist is creating can be so inspiring. I love this Laine magazine for knitting. So just looking at really beautiful patterns, and I don't really want to knit any of them right now, but just seeing what they are about, the textures, thinking about my own wardrobe starts the process, right? The ball starts rolling. Concepts that I'm interested in, but may not have the time to jump into just yet, let's learn about them. Down the road, I would like to do some embroidery on my knitting, but I don't really know how to do it. So how about a book that gives me some ideas of how, the tools, what might be needed? I don't have to do anything out of this book. I don't ever have to embroider anything. Just owning the book, reading the book, sitting down on the couch with a cup of tea, and just enjoy. So that also falls into, like I said, that kind of refresh. But here's another cool thing about addressing it, throwing the guilt away, cleaning up the space, putting hands on all the products, storing away the things that feel heavy. Just move them away for now. They're going to be safe and fine. You can get back to them. It might be 30 years, but you can get back to them. As I do this process, it is amazing to me how often I find that something else spinning out from my own projects becomes apparent as a new potential craft. So the other day I was cleaning up and going through some yarn stash, and I came across these that have been sitting there staring back at me. This one for 4 years, this one for 2. These are so crunchy and woolly. I will never be able to make a garment out of them. And I'm a garment knitter. That's what I make. And all of a sudden, I just thought, I want to weave those into a rug. So I immediately started doing a little bit of research. I have a yarn shop not too far from me, maybe an hour from here, that does a weaving class, and she sells looms. And I thought, just start at the beginning. Ask her what's going on. I popped online, followed my own steps to Burnout, and bought a book. And my focus is going to be on keeping it small. Again, step 8, find a good book, goes back to step 7, start with a small project. I do not want to bring in a loom the size of my dining room table and try to make a Navajo rug, right? I want to weave up a few little panels of fabric and stitch them together and call it a throw rug under my table. Like, we're going to keep it real simple, y'all. But I will say this about that kind of thing. I instantly knew exactly what yarns I wanted to use, exactly how I wanted to use them, what size loom that I was looking for, 10 inches to 16 inches. I'm going to debate that a little bit when I go down to the yarn sharp to look at them, where I would be able to store this thing, where I would be able to do this thing. It all just filtered in crystal clear for me. So another thing I'll say is don't force it. If there's a craft that's of appeal, sit on it for a while if it doesn't just pour down on you with clarity. This one poured down on me with clarity. I understood without a doubt that, and even the fabrics that I want to make out of this, I know exactly what I want to do with them. It was just crystal clear, and the initial investment in it is pretty minimal. So there we go. I have been working hard to get through this yarn stash, and this just felt like another cog in the wheel, like click, it just turned over, and all of a sudden moving forward again. I had kind of stalled out on that, and this felt like the path forward, and it felt really clear. So I'm going to do a part 2 of this video that is specific to knitting and to my 2024 knits this year, how I've battled through being in a bit of a knitting rut this year, some burnout, the projects I've done. So as knitters, if you want to join me for part 2, anyone's welcome there. But that's what it's going to focus on. This one today, I just wanted to run through those base steps. Let's run through them one more time together. 1, if you are in a bit of a rut with a hobby, let go of the guilt. Identify the source of the guilt. Is it coming from pressure from these products, or internalizing conversations that haven't even happened, that you feel like other people may be looking at you as if you are wasting time or resources? Address those. Write them down in that journal. Why do I care? Even if somebody else is giving me the hairy eyeball, does it really matter? Do I need to have a conversation with somebody about it? And, just be really clear about that part. Letting go of the guilt, letting go of the shame. That's always the first path to freedom in burnout. Part 2, next step, let's see, is clean up the crafting space. Just putting hands on the products can immediately inspire. It also can tell you very quickly what just needs to go. You know what? I don't know why I bought this, and I don't want it anymore, and I don't want it here anymore, and that's okay. I also am not an eBay seller. I don't have time to set that up. I'm driving this to Goodwill, right? It will come clear to you, and it is such a refreshing sensation to get rid of stuff, go through old pattern books, go through old project books that just aren't serving you anymore. Our tastes change. You're wearing the same shirt today that you wore in 1980. Hey, but you're still wearing shirts, right? It doesn't have to be the same thing. You can still love this craft, but change the way that you use it or how it serves you. Service any equipment that is needed. Buy an item or 2 as a treat. Just refresh it a little bit. It doesn't have to be a massive investment. 1 or 2 things to just brighten it all up. Start back with something tiny. If you're in a rut, brush, stroke, walk away. If you're in a rut, a 4x4 for no purpose, swatch while you're watching a show on the couch at night, just to feel the product, just to get your hands back in motion. Are you facing any deadlines or rules that you've set about your craft, and are they movable at this point? If you've agreed to a deadline, can you get out of that? If you have agreed to a test knit, maybe. If you've agreed to a cow, your friends are going to be okay if you back out. They're going to understand. So how arbitrary are those deadlines, and can we back away from them? If we're stuck within them, we've agreed to this thing, and by gosh, we're going to commit and get through. Clear notes in your journal about what your motivation was to say yes to that to begin with, and what your motivation is going to be next time to say, thanks, but that's not going to be for me. Be really clear with yourself about it, and give yourself a break on that too. No guilt, no shame. And finally, just get a cool book about whatever that craft is, and see what somebody is doing these days, and see if it reignites that spark that got you there to begin with. So I think they're all great tips for moving through burnout. I hope you do too. Please share in the comments below any tips that you have for burning out, curing the burnout, fixing the burnout. Yeah, I'd love to hear them, and so would anybody else who's watching this channel. So journals for breakfast, a little bit different format this time for episode number 5, but I will share a kind of fun journaling exercise for you as we close out here. Often I close with a tarot reading to sort of prompt us, but this was a lot of info and a lot for your journaling brain to think about. So I'm just going to leave a little journaling prompt here. And as we work on exercises like getting through burnout, where we are asking ourselves some hard questions. There's a practice you can do, and you may have heard about this, where you write down a question like, I feel guilty that I'm not using my yarn. And then you just ask why to every answer you place below, and as you work through the system. So why do I feel guilty about not using my yarn? And answer number one is, it cost me a lot of money, so I feel bad that it's just hanging on the wall. The next question, why? Well, because that money could be spent on something more important for the house or for the family. Why? Well, because spending money on myself when we probably could use a new air conditioner feels a little disingenuous. Why? Okay, because sometimes I feel like I haven't earned the right to spend this kind of money on myself. Why? You get what I'm saying? So it's the why game. And so you're going to start with asking yourself one big kind of question about what's holding you up. And then you answer the question. And then the next row, you just write the word why, and then answer the question. Why? And then answer the question. And it's really interesting to dive in. You can use that practice on all kinds of things. So the why game for journaling, that's your prompt for this episode. For the knitters that are watching, I hope you'll join me for part 2 of this, and let's go into my 2024 knitting. For the rest of you, looking forward to episode 6. We've got some fun journals I want to show you. I've been playing with a few different brands that are really popular, but are also super available. You can find them, some of them at Five Below, some of them at Barnes and Noble. So we'll be talking about some different journal styles next time. Okay, I hope you guys are having a glorious summer. Stay well and take care of yourself, let go of the shame, and have a beautiful week.